Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
This week, we are continuing our conversation surrounding last week's shooting at Annunciation Church, where 2 children lost their lives. We are joined today by Bryan Strawser. Bryan has 30 years of experience in crisis management, business continuity, crisis communications, and global corporate security. He has joined us previously to discuss Signalgate, Trump indictment, and other legal and security issues, but today he is joining us more in his role as chair of the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. With Bryan, we are going to break down the recent op-ed by Rob Doar, who is the Senior Vice President of Government Relations with the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. We will discuss current Minnesota and federal gun laws and proposed legislation as it relates to guns and school safety. Of course, we will also address the mental health angle we hit on last week. And we will get into Walz's calls for a special session to potentially pass new legislation on the matter. Lastly, we will break down the politics of it all, how the DFL and GOP have acted and reacted, and what we think of their movements and messaging. Thank you for joining us today and enjoy the show. We are excited to welcome back Bryan Strawser to the podcast. Bryan, you have been with us in a number of capacities, but this we're kind of putting on a different hat that we haven't really sunk into with you, and that is as chair of the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. We want to really get your expertise on this. You, your colleague Rob Doar, have been very thoughtful about, over the years, have been very thoughtful about how you conduct yourself, how you participate in the conversation as it surrounds guns. But today, we want to start by breaking down an op-ed that Rob Doar, who is the Senior Vice President with the Gun Owners Caucus, wrote in the Star Tribune titled, "Assault Weapon Bans Won't Stop Shootings, Mental Health Terror Can." This op-ed is very thoughtful, very backed by different facts and findings, and kind of breaks things down into different sections that I really want to get into. It starts with, if we are serious about preventing future violence, we must set aside symbolism and pursue evidence-based measures that command broad support. So can you walk us through this, why you and Rob choose to have conversations this way, really having that evidence-based facts behind where you stand and where you fight?
I mean, part of that might just be Rob and I are both pretty logical people and we like data, but both of our lives, we've always looked at the Second Amendment issue as a twofold challenge. One is that the Second Amendment means what it says, right? The Founding Fathers wrote, "shall not be infringed." The courts have generally ruled in a fairly strong pro-Second Amendment manner from the United States Supreme Court. The other side of that, when you get past that constitutional language, is the data doesn't support gun control. Not in a world that we live in here in the United States where owning a firearm is a specifically protected and enumerated constitutional right. We're not Australia, we're not the United Kingdom, so you can't take those kind of efforts here. The data takes us to other solutions. And I think what Rob was trying to get at in his editorial, and I think he explained this quite well, is that politically, at least through the next election, the votes are not there to pass any kind of gun control. So we could spend the next year and couple months until November 2026 arguing about the partisan issue of guns, or we could talk about the things where we have middle ground and we have common ground and can bring bipartisan legislation that could get unanimous votes around protecting schools and increasing access to mental health and more.
And I mean, I obviously don't want to speak for you both, so feel free to jump in if you disagree. But I think we can all are on the path that action does need to be taken to make sure that we are protecting schools, our children, and preventing mass shootings in our schools and around the nation. I want to break down some of these items and we'll kind of jump around a little bit, but in this op-ed of what won't work, he kind of breaks it down first with what will not work to prevent future violence, starting with assault weapon bans, which is something we hear a lot about. Talk to us about the facts behind this.
So I guess just some quick background. There was a federal, first of all, I don't like the term assault weapons. It means that was a term specifically created by a gun control group to make things sound scary. You're watching the DFL do that right now by calling them weapons of war as well. We had a ban, a federal ban from 1994 to 2004. It was deliberately set to sunset. That was part of the compromise that got the bill through. That was a ban on manufacture, so you couldn't make certain firearms. On sale, you couldn't sell them. Dealers could not sell them if they were manufactured after a certain date. They were still being made because police had them, which is a whole other issue. That ban also had a ban on high capacity magazines, which are, they arbitrarily set at 10 rounds. Same deal. Couldn't manufacture them except for law enforcement. You couldn't sell them if they were over 10 rounds, if they were manufactured after that date. But everything that everybody had, firearms and magazines, was grandfathered in. So if you had it, you could transfer it, you could sell it to somebody else. You just couldn't make anything new. So that's what they did in the 90s. The studies around this show that it didn't do anything. It didn't reduce multiple casualty shootings. It didn't reduce the number of rounds that were fired and homicides. It literally, their own internal study from the National Institutes of Justice showed it didn't do anything. So when it sunset in 2004, the Republicans were in control and they had zero desire to do anything with this. What they're proposing now, I have no idea, because they can't even tell us what's an assault weapon. What magazine restriction do you want into place? Is this a ban on selling, manufacturing, transferring? I mean, we can go into some other detail, but that's the background on the previous ban efforts that have happened.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in this situation, the shooter at Annunciation did not carry a semi-automatic assault weapon.
He had 3 firearms in his possession. He had a semi-automatic rifle.
Okay.
Some might call it an assault weapon. He had a shotgun, a normal shotgun, nothing special. And he had a handgun. And he used, according to Chief O'Hara, the Minneapolis police chief, in some of the press conferences, he used all 3 firearms.
Thank you for that clarification. One thing of note that we've talked about with this in our episode last week is that everything that we know, that these were all purchased legally, which goes to what won't work. Enhanced background checks is the next point of this op-ed. Minnesota has universal background checks. The Minneapolis shooter had no disqualifying record, no mental health commitments, nothing that triggered the system. They passed a check as smoothly as any lawful purchaser. Why is this such a buzz thing that some folks want, are these enhanced background checks, and why is that not the case?
To purchase a handgun, or what Minnesota statutes call a semi-automatic military-style assault weapon, it's a definition that's in state law. You can't just walk into a gun shop and purchase that. You have to have either a permit to purchase, which takes 30 days to process from your local police or sheriff, is free. It expires after 1 year. Or a permit to carry, which acts as a permit to purchase. That requires a class, a larger fee. You get that from your county sheriff. You have to wait up to 30 days. It's good for 5 years. So the background check, though, with those is completely duplicative. So Minnesota's created this second check that doesn't really do anything different than what happens with the check at the dealer. So we've heard some folks talking about enhanced background checks. I have no idea what they're talking about because they haven't articulated anything. But one thing that has come up in some of these conversations is, hey, we should do background checks so that we know if anyone has any mental illness. Okay. Current state and federal law says if you've been adjudicated in an adversarial process as dangerously mentally ill, then you can't possess a firearm or ammunition. So if you've been involuntarily committed, for example, through a court or other process, you can't possess a firearm or ammunition anywhere in the United States. That's federal law. If they want to do something like, hey, you've got to have your psychologist or doctor sign off on you owning a firearm, well, that's a pretty far infringement to happen there. And I don't think we want to have a world where when people seek mental health treatment for depression or anxiety, or pick your challenge, that we're suddenly saying they can't have guns. So I'm not sure what they mean by enhanced background check because they haven't provided any specifics.
And I think, to go for that just very quickly, I think one of the things that will happen if that is the process is people won't seek mental health. People will not, if there's not a respectful balance between people having access to mental health and getting the help that they need, and then not that level of scrutiny into their background, people will stop getting mental health because they know that would them getting routine mental health will prevent them from getting a firearm, hunting and enjoying the outdoors, they'll stop doing it.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, John Marty, who is unfortunately my state senator in Ramsey County, he hasn't introduced it this past session, but in the previous legislative biennium, Senator Marty introduced a bill that basically said your doctor had to sign off on you owning any kind of firearm, and you needed to get a psychological evaluation to get a permit to carry. And I mean, it had all kinds of crazy stuff in there, and it would do exactly what you're saying. Is it's going to deter people from wanting to get help when they need help. And if we continue to put in burdens on, you have to get doctor's permission to own a firearm, that's just putting hurdles in the way of law-abiding citizens like me from possessing firearms. And that's the point, trying to make it difficult for anybody to have a gun because John Marty doesn't like guns.
The next point that was made was what won't work, demonizing communities. And I really appreciate, it's sad that it should be applauded, but I do want to applaud that this is something that was included in this op-ed, because as Rob noted, and this is quoting, within hours, some voices were suggesting that transgender individuals should be barred from firearm ownership. Such a proposal is both repugnant to constitutional principles and to basic notions of human equality. And then it goes on to say the right of self-defense adheres in all individuals. To strip it away from a class of people because of their identity is indefensible. It was really gross to see some of the responses immediately when we came to find out more about the shooter in this case. I guess as simple as it sounds, why do you and Rob support that these rights adhere to everyone, that everyone deserves to have their Second Amendment rights upheld?
Because that's the way the Constitution was written, that whether we're talking about the Second Amendment or any other right that we have as citizens or residents in this country, it applies to everyone. And it doesn't matter your political point of view, your gender, your race, your creed, your religion. None of that matters. It is inherent in your rights to keep and bear arms. Now, certainly the courts have held that on an individual basis, when individuals are found to be dangerous, they're a convicted violent felon, they're adjudicated dangerously mentally ill, then the courts have said, yes, you can restrict those rights and other rights. We put people in jail, of course, but you don't get to do it just because they're female or because we had one person email us this morning and said, what you need to do is change the red flag law so that all Democrats are prohibited from owning guns. I'm like, well, they're not signing up for that either. That's just not how constitutional rights work.
Then there are 3 points that I want to kind of blend into the next conversation of proposed legislation and what can work. So I'm going to jump back to those, but I want to stay on the gun topic before we hit the mental health, school safety, and that sort. Can you walk us through a little bit of some of what we currently have in law, both state and federal laws surrounding guns in Minnesota or for Minnesotans? And let's start there.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about purchasing earlier. I think we could talk about, I guess it depends where you want to go here. So one of the things I should point out, bringing firearms into a school is generally not allowed in Minnesota. K through 12 schools and their grounds are not a place where we allow carry without permission. You can get permission from a principal or superintendent in writing to carry a firearm. And there are hundreds of Minnesotans, probably outside the metro generally, that have gained such permission because the schools don't see permit holders as a threat. But, a school shooting in Minnesota, that's one of multiple laws that this individual broke when they committed these crimes. Beyond that, I'm trying to think of things relevant to this recent incident. We don't have magazine restrictions, so you can have a magazine of any size here in Minnesota. Firearms typically come with magazines that are bigger than what the governor is likely going to propose here as a limit. I mean, a semi-automatic rifle tends to come with a 30-round magazine. Handguns 15 to 17 to 19 is pretty common. We just don't restrict those items today, and most states don't. So I don't know if there's a specific area of law you'd want to go into, but those are a couple things that come to mind.
Nope, that you hit on it, and I want to kind of walk into then some of the proposals which you alluded to. I did want to note in one of the articles I read, mentioned, and worth reminding our listeners that when Democrats held the Minnesota House and Senate in 23 and 24, they expanded background checks for gun sales and transfers, and they also passed red flag laws allowing people to petition a judge to take away guns from anybody who is deemed dangerous. Those are in effect. Neither really came into play here again, and we'll chat about the mental health, which we spent a lot of time on last time. But because this individual had not had red flags raised, the red flag laws did not come into play, did not change anything for this shooter.
And I think we'll learn more about this as the investigation continues. Clearly, this individual had some pretty serious mental health issues. I'm really curious why the red flag law wasn't used. Extreme risk protective order is the name of the law. I would really like to know why that didn't happen. This is the kind of poster child situation that law was sold on at the legislature, and it failed here because apparently no one reported this behavior.
To that point, one of the things that I was curious to get your take on today was, do you think there has been much promotion about the fact that exists in the law? Because in my conversations with a number of people, and a lot of those stems from the fact that they know I have a podcast with Becky, that I've had you on, aside from them knowing the fact that I carry and have an understanding, not as well as you do, Bryan, about the scope and size of the issues related to this. A lot of them were surprised that there hadn't been more awareness about that issue. Do you think enough has been done to make that, know that people have that as an option?
I don't think so, because I've seen a lot of county attorneys and some of the professional associations, the chiefs, the sheriffs, MPPOA, and others doing awareness around this. But I do want to point out, we oppose this bill, and we still don't think this bill is a great idea. But now that I've said that, I know the state recently, and this is another issue we can talk briefly about, the state did staff a position for a statewide coordinator for extreme risk protective orders within DPS within the Department of Public Safety, within the last couple of weeks, who's supposed to help promote this. Unfortunately, they hired an anti-gun activist who was too extreme for Everytown and Protect Minnesota, and has threatened to protest my house and my business and Rob's house.
Oh my God.
So we've made the commissioner aware of that as of yesterday. I just found out about this over the weekend. Made the commissioner aware of it. We've had some conversation with legislators, but that's not going to help. She's also written numerous anti-police editorials, so I don't know how she's going to go around teaching police. So that was just a bad hire. It was like the cannabis director all over again.
Explain to our listeners why, even though it's in law now, that your organization is opposed to or not supportive of that legislation.
So the issues we have a number of issues with the red flag laws. First is, we think it's a Fourth Amendment violation. I'm sorry, let me back up. We think there's a Second and a Fourth Amendment issue with the red flag laws, because there is an emergency order, which is what's being used almost all the time, to take guns away from an individual upon the filing of red flag protective order request without any representation. The police just show up and they take the guns. They leave, I'm just going to use a suicide example here. They leave rope, flammable material, knives, axes, hammers, cars. We take one weapon away. And we don't take them into custody. We don't arrest them. We don't take them for mental health care. We don't do any of those things. We just take away the gun or guns. So we have a number of issues with that. The standard of evidence is too low. Police get to store the guns. They're completely free of any negligence or liability claims. So if they take your gun and throw it in a bag of water and let it rust, they're not liable for that. They don't pay you anything. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of the Minneapolis police evidence locker, but it's not great.
I haven't been there. I haven't been there recently, but it's on my tour for next week.
I want to start walking through some of the proposed legislation. We'll kind of chat through the political ramifications or motions.
Becky, can you stop?
Yeah. I want to start walking through some of the proposed legislation that we've heard about. We'll kind of chat more about the political angle to all of this, what the DFL think and Republicans think, but just kind of want to walk through it as on its face right now, starting with, again, the assault rifle ban. The op-ed from Rob, again, wrote, no workable proposal has been advanced to address the tens of thousands of AR-15 style rifles already lawfully owned in Minnesota. Goes on to say that 10 states in the District of Columbia have banned assault rifle weapons, and the federal law prohibited them, like you mentioned, until 2004. And then, as we've learned, the U.S. Supreme Court this summer has declined to take up challenges to assault weapon ban in Maryland and a ban on high-capacity magazines in Rhode Island. Chat us through your thoughts on this. And, I mean, we kind of already went through it, but anything else to say on this?
I mean, we have no idea what the governor's gun control package is going to look like. It could be a simple repeat of the 1994 ban. I would say that's the mildest version and probably not going to happen. All the way up through, you have to get rid of these by a certain date. I don't know how he expects that to work, but I don't know exactly what he's proposing. When he was talking to the press yesterday morning about this, he was citing Australia. Australia banned semi-automatic rifles and made you turn them in. So maybe that's what he's proposing. I don't see how that helps the DFL outside of the metro, and I don't know gun owners that are going to follow that law. I just don't think that's going to happen.
And again, from my opinion on this, wouldn't it be a clear delineation between lawful, law-abiding individuals and criminals?
Not with a ban. The ban would be that you can't own it, you can't buy it, you can't sell it, you can't transfer it. But the assault weapons ban that's currently before the legislature, there's a version in the House and Senate, is a complete ban on manufacture, sale, and transfer. So after a certain date, you can't buy them, you can't give them to someone else, you can't sell it to someone else. It's yours alone. And when you die, you have to turn it into the police. So in a generation, all those guns would be gone.
My meaning on that is that lawful individuals would be the ones that would turn their guns in if in a confiscation thing, whereas criminals, anybody looking to do harm, would probably be like, well, I'm going to break the law anyways if I'm seeking to murder or whatever the case may be. They would hold on to them. So confiscation, in my mind, those seeking to do harm and with guns are likely not going to be like, here you go, please.
I would agree with that, but I also don't think law-abiding Minnesotans are going to go turn in all their semi-automatic rifles.
Fair.
They're in turning mine in.
I'm not turning mine in. So then what do? You're going to come arrest Michael
Fair.
and I? How's that going to work? So I don't know yet what he's got proposed. We'll find out later this week.
We've also heard about banning standard magazines, which you've talked a little bit about. We don't currently have. And like we just mentioned, confiscating guns are two of the big ones. And then we had a big press conference. Mayor Jacob Fry of Minneapolis, Mayor Melvin Carter of St. Paul, as well as a dozen or so other mayors from around the metro area held a press conference this week asking to basically, amongst other things, wanting to do city by city gun reforms, pass gun control laws, which is currently prohibited. You guys had the Gun Owners Caucus. As one article I've read, I said, blasted this notion, which I think is a great way of saying it, and said that someone carrying legally under a state permit could unknowingly violate a patchwork of local ordinances just driving to work. It's unreasonable to expect every citizen to study the local codes of every town. Chat us through why this doesn't work, why this is banned in Minnesota.
Yeah, so look, I live in a Minneapolis suburb. I work in a further Minneapolis suburb that's 10 miles from my house. I drive through 7 different city or county jurisdictions in 10 minutes between my house and my office where I am right now. How am I supposed to know all 10 of those laws? And particularly, I thought Jacob Fry got a great, you do press conferences at City Hall is one thing, or you do press conferences at State Capitol, and the Capitol Press is there. They come with better questions. Someone asked Jake Fry at the press conference yesterday, so if you banned the possession of these firearms in Minneapolis, which they already have an ordinance that does this, they passed years ago. It just can't be enforced because of preemption. So you can't have it at all. It's a misdemeanor to possess. They said if somebody's driving down 35W and they get stopped by the police and the police find out the rifle's in the car, could they be charged with violating your ordinance? Yes. Well, that's ridiculous. So that's why we have statewide preemption, is so that people who want to follow the law don't have to understand all of these different criminal laws, city by city, township by township, county by county.
Obviously, over the last week, just like the great work that the Gun Owners Caucus does throughout legislation or the legislative session and year round, responding to misinformation, disinformation, and then providing your own factual information, you often get a lot of hate, but it's been a little bit more different and a little bit more pointed. I think, from what I've heard from you over the last week. Talk to us a little bit about the threats that that Rob, that the caucus has gotten over the last week, and quite simply why this is not productive.
Well, I mean, look, Rob and I are always open to a rational conversation. We don't have time to have, hour-long conversations with every person that sends in commentary, but we try to reply to everybody as best we can, even those that we disagree with. And we'll engage with someone when they want to have rational conversation, or they're seeking information, or they're open to a different point of view. But we've gotten messages like, you're scumbags who sacrifice children to your twisted, selfish need to compensate for your tiny dicks. That's just not helpful.
Well, there goes the rating for this episode.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
And then we've had a couple voicemails and emails basically telling us that we should go kill ourselves. That it's our fault that children are being killed across the United States. Our fault. It's our members and supporters, and Rob and I specifically.
2 points I want to make. Number one, it's terrible that you're experiencing that. I have said to my family that I think this is probably one of the most dangerous times that I remember being around, that there's just a level of tension and volatility and anger in the air right now. And it's terrible that you're experiencing that you and Rob are. Second of all, I applaud you for making the public aware of it. Because I think one of the things that this is a choice that I've had to make sometimes when I deal with threats and I get harassment, is to speak out about them. I think it's important that people do that, because we need the people that support, that consider you friends, and the people that need to know this stuff is going on. And I talk about that a lot, that a lot of times when people get harassed online or they get threatening stuff, their response is to just be intimidated, cower, or just be like, look, I don't want to draw attention to it. It's really important that people know, and I'm so sorry that you're experiencing that, you and Rob are, but I applaud you for speaking out and addressing it head on.
Yeah, I mean, people need to know that there are people out there acting like that, because I think it's not just one political side that engages in this behavior. In this case, it's the left, or the anti-gun left. I don't want to paint everybody with a broad stroke. But these people that are doing this are nuts, and they need to be called out for their behavior. That's why we post it with their name, because I hope it embarrasses them.
I echo Michael's statement or sentiment that I sincerely apologize that you're going through that. And, that's one thing we always have cherished, is productive conversations, even when it's tough, even with people you disagree with. And this is obviously a really heated, hot button issue for folks in Minnesota and around the country. And it has been for quite a while. And one thing that I've seen a lot, I follow a lot of different accounts, parenting accounts on Instagram, and different ones that I see a lot of stuff towards mothers, that if you don't immediately support all restrictions and confiscation of guns, that these children's blood is on your hands as well. Yeah. And I think that this is what I want to get into, is some of the other things that we need to have on the table. And I don't understand why, when having these conversations, whether that's when we talk about special session or any sort of legislation, let's start with putting everything on the table and then figure out where we can get and what we can pass and what actually has evidence, fact-based statistics or evidence behind it that can back up what is truly going to make a difference, what is going to protect our children and protect our cities, our towns, and all of us. And so I kind of want to walk through, obviously, I think that two of the things that where I see there are a lot of potential, and what we've talked about, Michael and I have talked about, is school safety and mental health components of this. And these are some things that certainly should be on the table. And I think anybody only focused on guns and not willing to address these situations are only looking at one piece of the puzzle, and to disregard folks who want to look at these two is just really, irks me quite a bit. So again, I'm going to pull back from some of the Rob Doar's op-ed. This kind of goes into the last three things where he talks about what can work. They were expanding mental health infrastructure, hardening soft targets sensibly, and denying murder's infamy. Starting with the school safety. So again, we talked about this in the manifesto of the shooter. They talked about intentionally hitting schools, places of worship, because the attackers had little resistance. They obviously also talked about standing over the innocent, very chilling stuff. But when it comes to school safety, I apologize, the op-ed points to the proposed SHIELD Act in Minnesota. Can you walk us through that and how this is potentially offers the ability to mitigate attacks on schools in Minnesota?
Yeah, so Representative Ingen is the chief author of this. I think he had a pretty good press conference about it back in February. It was passed out of committee unanimously and then never made it to the floor. But Elliott's bill is pretty comprehensive. It provides resources for schools around assessing physical security, implementing a layered security approach, meaning just multiple things that are there, better controlled access points, environmental design of schools down to, your single or more minimal number of points of entrances that you can control, and provides the ability for schools to set up threat assessment and management teams. So these are a pretty well-defined process around how they handle threats of violence within the school or kids or other outside threats that may pose a risk to the school. This is a program and a science used by large corporations and others, and there's no reason it couldn't be applied to schools. I think, too, there's other things beyond just Elliott's bill. Non-public schools didn't have access to school safety grants. The governor didn't budge on that, despite the Catholic bishops from across the state asking to be included for their schools. There's been money in the past around school grants and school physical assessments to help guide some of those efforts. I think all of those are worth looking at and funding appropriately. And there's the issue too of where we have school resource officers and where it's appropriate to do so based on risk, and making sure that there's funding available for school districts to provide for that.
One point I wanted to make about this discussion that we're having right now is in the aftermath of the absolutely tragic assassination of Speaker Hortman and her husband, and then the attacks on Senator Hoffman and his wife and his family at their home. A lot of the discussion centered on, in the immediate aftermath, about what we can do to make legislators safer. Discussions about the state capitol, but also at their homes. And I think that conversation was reasonable to have those types of conversations. One of the things I think that I'm challenged by a bit as a parent of three kids that go to schools is how little I think we're discussing school safety from the standpoint of the physical safety, the layout, the enhancement that can be done at the school. I would just say respectfully, and I mean this in the most respectful way, if we can have that conversation after what happened earlier this summer about those targeted attacks, we should be able to have those same conversations about our schools. And I think if it was worthy in that previous situation, it's worthy to be discussed right now, and I'd like to see it more discussed.
I think that's an excellent point. I will say one thing that we love where our children go to daycare. They're obviously years away from actually being in a school. It's a daycare center, and it's a franchise-owned daycare center. We got a note from our director either the day of, afternoon of, or the next day. They're in the process of expanding and talked about how they were going to be moving up some of the additional security measures. We already have to check in on an iPad. If you're not known, you have to show an ID. There is a locked door that you have to get buzzed through to get into the center. And at our daycare center, I mean, obviously this is not state dollars that they're doing, but immediately he took this upon us to send a letter, to send a note, to calm parents' concerns and really take action on that. And that's something I respect so greatly. And obviously I think that's an incredible point, and one that I hadn't made. So I appreciate you bringing up that if this was part of the conversation immediately after those horrific assassination and shootings earlier this summer, it should still be part of the conversations now.
I'll point out too, just on the Capitol security, I don't want to get distracted, but since you brought it up, the state patrol has hired a firm to do an assessment of the state capitol. They hired former St. Paul Chief Todd Axtell's consulting firm. But what I found interesting about what they asked him to do was evaluate 4 buildings on the massive state capitol complex, and nothing about legislators' safety outside of the Capitol complex, which is where the attack happened. So I think there's still opportunity for the Department of Public Safety to think about this in a more comprehensive way. I'm less concerned about an attack at the state capitol than I am about what actually did happen, which was these legislators attacked at their home, and legislators being attacked at an event down the road. That seems more risk to me than the Capitol. But I am not a security expert. Just play one on TV.
Turning our attention to mental health. This is something Michael and I discussed at length last week. Obviously something I think that is very important piece to this puzzle. As we discussed, we obviously all agree the Second Amendment is for everyone. And one of the things that Rob noted in his op-ed is, I'm just going to quote it, in Minnesota, mental health resources are sparse to non-existent, particularly in rural areas. This leaves families and communities with little recourse. If we are serious about prevention, we must address these deficits directly. More providers in underserved regions, more telehealth capacity, and greater investment in accessible treatment. All you, Bryan, speak to that for us.
Yeah. So look, it from just overall mental health, but I'm going to tie this back to firearms for a second. The vast majority of firearm deaths in Minnesota, deaths by firearm, are suicides, and the vast majority of those happen in rural Minnesota, outside of the metro, primarily with white men outside of the metro. That is the place where you want to have impact on a mental health standpoint. That is the place to do that. I don't know if any of you have had any experience with trying to get mental health care in Minnesota, but you can't get an appointment for weeks because there's not enough providers. You can't, if you need inpatient treatment, you can't find a bed for weeks to months. One of my friends has a child with a eating disorder, and I think it took them 6 weeks to find inpatient treatment for her. So that's a pretty sad state of affairs. And she wasn't even, suicidal like we're talking about here. So there's a great opportunity here to expand access to mental health resources across Minnesota, both for acute and, ongoing outpatient basis.
One of the Violence Project's research showed that 4 in 5 mass shooters were in a period of identifiable crisis prior to their attack, and nearly half leaked their intentions to others. This is something I know, or I would expect that we find out more about in the coming weeks and months surrounding this incident at Annunciation. We chatted about this last week, that this doesn't happen in a vacuum, that this, the amount of time and energy that this individual spent writing, talking, creating videos, it's hard to believe that there wasn't others who knew about this. And certainly that's something that we need to make sure we're identifying and giving folks resources and letting them know where those resources exist if somebody around them expresses any sort of intention such as this. And, one of the other things that is relevant in this situation is the shooter really idolized other mass shooters and had spent a lot of time focusing on Adam Lanza and others who did the mass shootings in New Zealand and mosque attacks, church attacks, school attacks, wrote these names of individuals on the weaponry that he used in the attack at the Annunciation Church. And so the last point that was made in this op-ed of what can work is denying murderer's infamy. Obviously is going to take a lot of work and discipline for media, for social media, for everyone to really make sure that we don't give these shooters any notoriety. But that is one piece that Rob hit on, and your take on both those last 2 things that I mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, from a school violence or mass shooting situation, there's almost always leakage of plans and issues up front. I think the Violence Project said that happened about half of the time. That's where I think I'm really curious with this one, like where was the reporting around this? And I'm sure their parents are in a horrible situation and feeling awful over all of this. but I would like to know what happened. Like where did that break down? When it comes to the notoriety issue, I thought Representative Kelly Moeller, the co-chair of House Public Safety, where she and I don't agree on the gun issue, I thought she had a great op-ed in the Star Tribune about notoriety. And I thought she appropriately called out the Star Tribune for their article where they went way into the perpetrator's background and, named them dozens of times. We just can't, I don't think anyone's trying to hide anything here, but we really should not provide that kind of notoriety focused on the shooter. The press did the same thing with the guy that shot Representative Hortman and her husband and the dog and the state senator, Mr. Bolter. There's no need for that kind of, it's not really promotion, but I think, in the name of journalism, they're covering this, but they're covering it in a way that just adds more fuel to the fire for people who want to be like that because they have, mental health challenges that take them that way. And I think it's sad too. I commented on a Facebook post from Representative Moeller about her op-ed that, hey, this is an area you and I agree on. And I got criticized for saying anything positive about a DFLer who wants to take our guns. And I'm like, yeah, but we agree on this. No, you can't. It's horrible that you said that you'd agreed with her. I'm like, come on. Can we find some common ground on some things?
With our remaining time with you, Bryan, I want to chat briefly here about special session, our favorite topic. Governor Walz tweeted before the weekend, it's time to take serious action at the state capitol to address gun violence. On Tuesday, he confirmed he was speaking to legislators, although questionable whether he had reached out to Republicans at that point yet. What's your initial thoughts on the governor proposing a special session and how he's gone about this so far?
I think the way the governor's gone about this is political posturing and no real attempt to solve anything. He did not call the speaker until yesterday. And my understanding of that conversation is that was him talking, not asking for cooperation. It was, we're going to do this and you need to come along. And this is just an act. I thought, look, they don't have the votes. They certainly do in the Senate after, even if they called it today. We've got 2 open seats, but it doesn't change the makeup. The DFL still has a 1-vote majority in the Senate. They can hold hearings and pass whatever they want. The House, nothing's going to happen. You need agreement between the co-chairs of a committee to bring a bill before the committee. It's not going to happen. You need +1 Republican to get a bill out of committee. It's not going to happen. You need +1 Republican to schedule something for the floor through the Rules Committee. It's not going to happen. And even through some other method, if you even got the bill to the floor, you need +1 GOP to pass the bill, and that's not going to happen. So this is all a political act to get Republicans on the record on guns, which they're really only going to be able to do in the Senate. And that's it. I mean, they'll certainly try to talk about other bills. Maybe the DFL and GOP will cooperate and move on some of these other priorities we've talked about here. But this special session is just political posturing. It's not going to solve anything. And it's just going to set up fodders that'll be in your mailbox next November.
So for the timeline of this, the shooting occurred on the 27th. On the 29th is when the governor tweeted that something needs to be done. On September 1st, so 6 days later, is when he confirmed he was reaching out to legislators, and that's when he 6 days later reached out to Speaker Demuth for the first time. To your point about the political posturing, Leader Niska tweeted, if this were serious and not a partisan stunt, he would have been calling Republicans, starting with the Speaker of the House. But in fact, it's just a political partisan stunt. After this, the Demuth had also tweeted before she spoke with the governor, but after he announced a special session, she said, as disappointing as it is that the governor is doing this in such an overtly political way, House Republicans stand ready to protect students in schools. And then following her conversation with the governor yesterday, she wrote in a statement, after a long overdue conversation with the governor, the facts are clear. If he decides to call a special session, anything that we need needs to have bipartisan support. The House proved that we can work in a bipartisan fashion last session, and that cooperation needs to continue. If Governor Walz and Democrats are focused on partisan accusations and demands, this special session will not be productive for the people of Minnesota. Michael, your thoughts on how this all kind of went down?
Well, we should define some of the constitutional responsibilities. The governor can call it, but it's up to the legislature to end it. Now, sometimes there's been Minnesota has special sessions that are on a very regular basis, so they shouldn't be called special. But in a lot of situations, the work is, there's an agreement in advance that the special session will cover these topics. It will last these number of days. And that's kind of an arrangement between the caucus leaders. I don't know in this particular situation if that's going to get worked out in advance. And so the governor can call it, but if it's not pre-concrete, if there's not that agreement in advance about the length and scope, this could either be really quick or it could go on for a while. And I think to Bryan's point and to Rob's point, and one of the things that I just want to close up my comments with on this is you can disagree with where the Gun Owners Caucus is on this issue. There is really no way I think that anyone can credibly claim that Rob and Bryan are not offering substantive, concrete, and thoughtful solutions and engaging in this debate in a very meaningful way. And I think what they've laid out is a path where there could be agreement on some issues. And I would certainly hope that a legislative session would follow that direction, because this can either go into a long political back and forth where nothing gets accomplished, or legislators can accept the political reality of where we're at right now. And I think Bryan did a great job of laying out the process of where the data and the numbers are and what could actually be done. And boy, oh boy, if we could get some of those things that Rob laid out and that Bryan has talked about, I think we could really make some meaningful impact in preventing these types of incidents from happening again.
I do think there's, first, thanks. I think Rob and I both appreciate that. Sometimes it's awful lonely out here, as you're in the midst of this. I do think that there's opportunity here for Republicans. Now that we're a week past this and, we're starting to deal with the politics of this, I do think it's time for Republicans to start talking more about and pushing back and offering alternatives on legislation. The DFL has had the air for, I think, 5 days now straight of rallies and protests and press conferences about gun control. I don't know what else they have to say until they bring a package forward. But a key thing, I think, for Republicans to understand, elected officials, are two things. One, the base of the party, the ones who voted and put you there, need to know that you stand with them. Because right now they're not hearing a whole lot, or they're hearing a lot of political speak. They need to hear some more direct things. Like, our members know we're going to fight for them. I need the Republicans to do the same, the pro-gun Republicans, for the folks that elected them. The second thing is, I think Republicans, I know they're under a lot of pressure right now from activists, from Moms Demand Action and other groups. I think Republicans need to remember that those folks aren't single issue, and they are never, ever going to vote for Republicans. The crossover between, for example, pro-choice Democrats and Moms Demand Action members that are blowing up legislators' phones right now is almost a circle. Those folks are not going to vote for Republicans, even if you vote in every gun control thing that they want. That's not the Republican base, and that's how they need to be. They need to be thinking about this and remembering that supporting some kind of gun control in an effort to seem more electable isn't going, one, it's betraying your base, and two, it's not going to help, because those folks are not going to vote for you. And that's just the political reality that we see.
Bryan, we want to thank you for your time. I know we took up a lot of it, but we really, like we said, respect you and Rob and what you're doing, the messaging you're putting out there. Tell people where they can find a little bit more about the Gun Owners Caucus, where they can follow you on Twitter and your website.
Sure. The most important thing you can do to keep up to date on what's going on is join our mailing list. That's gunowners.mn/alerts. And our website is gunowners.mn. We're on Twitter as MN Gun Caucus, and you can find us on Facebook under our name, and also on YouTube.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
for
Bryan.
having me.
Becky, we just concluded an interview with Bryan Strawser with the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. Your take?
I obviously we love Bryan. He's been on a number of times to talk about all sorts of different topics. But I think one thing that you and I agree on is there a way to have a reasonable, rational conversation surrounding the topic and really focus on historical aspects, facts, findings, figures, and statistics and how they do back up or don't support different things being proposed. And I think it's a hard conversation sometimes to have. I think we've talked a little bit about how sometimes, the compassionate argument seems to be more out there productive than a fact-based, evidence-based conversation. But it is really important, especially when we're talking about something that is a constitutional right. And I think their way of going about this in the op-ed, what we've seen their messaging on social media, the conversations they've engaged in, the pushback that they've done, and also proposing solutions, proposing things that we can do to make an impact, make a difference, I think is a really well-rounded, thoughtful way to approach this. And I'm grateful we do have them as a kind of, I hate the word, but a thought leader.
I agree with everything you just said. I think that Bryan and Rob's approach to discussing this issue is absolutely spot on. That doesn't mean I agree with every perspective and every take that they have, but their approach is spot on, and the tone and the manner in which they speak about it, I think, is just perfect. And I really hope that the people that they engage with speak to it at that level too, because I think this is, I stand by what I said in the interview with Bryan. This is an ugly, dangerous time. It was a really ugly summer for a variety of reasons. This is going to lead into, I think, a very substantive debate, a very substantive policy debate. And I'm very appreciative to have a podcast with you where we can have thoughtful people on to discuss these issues. Now, there is a passionate argument on the other side, and we should do our part to make sure we're engaging that side to the degree which we can. But the bottom line is, I think Rob and Bryan do just an absolutely fantastic job. And it's our podcast. We get to decide who we have on. But boy, oh boy, are we lucky and fortunate to have people like Bryan and Rob who are accessible and available and are willing to come on and discuss issues and lay them out, I think, in such a thoughtful, meaningful way. And it's going to be a very interesting and possibly ugly next few weeks.
Before, I want to chat a little bit more about special session and the politicalness of it all. But I do want to kind of hit on something that you just said about the compassionate, compelling arguments on the other side. And this is just kind of me spouting off what's on my head and on my brain this last week. As a Republican, as somebody who thinks of myself as a constitutional conservative, but also as a mother and somebody who does not interact with guns very often and does not have that personal relationship with firearms and the safety surrounding it all, it is scary. And I do understand why people, mothers and parents in particular, do want to jump to take them all away. We don't need any guns. Let's protect our children. Removing all guns is the easiest way to do that. It does resonate with me. But I think we need to remind people or remind ourselves and just have that conversation that we don't pass legislation just because it's what's going to make us feel warm and fuzzy. We have to do what is achievable. We talked about how confiscation of guns is certainly just not the answer because it's just simply not possible. We need to do what follows the law of the land and the Constitution. Again, why a lot of this is not achievable or possible. And we need to look at science-backed, evidence-based facts. And that's where I really respect Bryan and Rob and the conversation that we have, because it does help calm that a little bit in me. Also makes me a little fearful when I see the meme saying any mom who doesn't support this has blood on their hands. I mean, it's just such a volatile time out there that I think we just need to all calm down a little bit and try to find actual solutions that have the potential to pass, that are going to pass in a legal way without going through the court system and being overturned 2-4 years later. And it's just kind of how it rattles around in my brain, because I feel torn on this, but this conversation, this op-ed, folks like the Gun Owners Caucus help lay it out in a very obtainable, absorbable way to remind me that this is simply how we should go about having this conversation to pass legislation and policies that change. So that was a bunch of word vomit from what's been spinning around my brain for the last week.
No, I think it's a great point. And what you'll hear in response is, I think what the propensity for that very thoughtful, laid out statement will a lot of times be is, calm down. I mean, we have shootings and everything that's going on. And I get that. I get that point. But the truth of the matter is I think we have to be realistic on how we can solve it. And, I've spoken to a lot of people in the last week or so talking about this issue. And I think one of the things that I think is missing is an appreciation and understanding of the prevalence of guns in this country and how much they are a part of who we are as Americans. And as much as people maybe want to roll their eyes at that and not think it's significant, it is I think the largest misconception and misunderstanding that a lot of people have about guns. And, but we are spouses and parents first, and we will do anything to protect our kids. And I think as long as we continue to provide a platform for people to have discussions, I think we're going to get a lot of good ideas on this type of stuff.
I do want to kind of circle back to special session a little bit more. So Walls had said, after he said he's considering a special session and now kind of taking actions towards that, he mentioned this week that he is putting together plans. He'll put out a proposal. It was quoted saying he'll put out a proposal in the next day or so. And I think it's very comprehensive. It's been done in other places. It's been done without infringements on people's Second Amendment rights, but it has proven that it will help protect our students. I mean, the $1 million question is, what is this going to look like? And we'll certainly come back to have a conversation about this once this proposal has been released, which may be released by the time this podcast is airing. But don't worry, we'll come back and give our take on that soon. Any initial thoughts of what you anticipate we will see from the governor's proposal?
I think it's going to be heavy on gun control. It's going to be heavy on restrictions. I would love to see a balanced proposal, one that has school safety, one that has strong mental health. And that's the proposal, I think. I honestly think after listening to Bryan, and Bryan laid out the process and what it would take in order procedurally to get legislation passed, I think it's difficult. I don't think the votes are there. I don't think the process has set up for it to be productive. So why not focus on things that there can be agreement on? And the challenge that I have in these types of debates is one side is not going to recognize the reality of the situation. And this is where I mean, politics is truly the art of compromise. And I think one of the points that I've consistently said since this happened was, I think is missing in the debate, and I haven't seen press conferences enough about school safety and the mental health component aspect of this. And this is fundamentally where I think Republicans have failed.
I'm certainly going to hit on that before we close this out, because what would be a conversation about policy without talking about the politics of it all? But first, sticking on the governor, when he tweeted that we need to take action at the state capitol, you posted he's running. Chat with me about that.
I think this is a fight that, first of all, we are after Labor Day. We still don't have a clear decision from the governor if he's running for a third term. We also don't have any idea who he would run with. And so we're getting pretty late into the election cycle. There's been some buzz about some other candidates. There was a Star Tribune wrote a story about Steve Simon, Secretary of State Steve Simon, being a potential candidate. But if this might be the type of policy fight, that he may want to stick around for and be a part of past into another term. This is not, as much as I think that people want to believe that this is like, and I've heard this, I don't know how relevant it is anymore. We just talk about kind of bumper sticker politics or bumper sticker policy. This is not going to be an easy fix. And what I got out of that statement was that he was setting up for a potential fight. And I could see him making gun policy and the debate over guns the centerpiece of a campaign going into 2026 that he runs on. Every day, I think we get farther away from him. Every day that he doesn't announce that he's not running, I still think he's running.
Fair point.
Your take?
No, I agree. I mean, I could see him staking the flag in the sand of this kind of being a mainstay of what his third term campaign would be. It is certainly interesting coming from a former congressman who I believe had received some endorsements or at least favorable grades from the NRA. He is a known hunter. In fact, I believe one of the events when I was staffing Congressman Emmer was also Congressman Walz, and they went clay pigeon shooting together. And, you know, he's certainly somebody that is a little bit more familiar and has an actual relationship with guns and firearms of some capacity. So I think it is an interesting place for him to be, potentially a reasonable place for him to come out. But I think it is an interesting thing that could be a key point of his third term.
He was endorsed by the NRA when he ran for Congress.
Okay, moving into the political angle. I want to just mention this because I think it is interesting. Last week, the Pope demanded an end to the pandemic of arms as he prayed for victims in the Minnesota school shooting. Obviously, we do have an American Pope now. I do think thought that was interesting. Just wanted to flag that. But I want to work through the differences of Democrat, Republican responses, actions, reactions. And I know you have some thoughts on the matter. In fact, I'm going to start by using and quoting one of your tweets. You wrote, "The question shouldn't be why Minnesota Democrats are organizing for a policy debate in the aftermath of a church and school shooting. The question should be, why aren't Republicans?" This is another example of the intensity gap between Democrats and Republicans. Walk us through a little bit of what you've seen over the last week from the Democrats, from the Republicans, and your thoughts or frustration on the matter.
Look, I approach this from someone who considers himself to be a homeless Republican, but also someone who is a passionate advocate for the Second Amendment, which I talked about last episode. In the aftermath of this shooting, Democrats have dominated the media in terms of promoting their message that they have about how they choose to respond and how they are planning to respond to this shooting. And so I disagree with a lot of what they're talking about. And I've not seen the Republicans do much aside from spending time on social media. They have not stood up in front of the press, in front of the cameras, and talked about the policies that they have. And I think if it wasn't for the gun caucus, there would be no pro Second Amendment, pro school safety, mental health messaging that has gotten out in any substantive way. And I think what the Democrats are doing is they are aggressively organizing and building for a battle that's coming, whether it's in this session or in the next election cycle in 2026, on the issue of guns and the issue of gun policy and the Second Amendment. And my question, and what I've seen in response to some of what I've seen the Democrats doing, is a bunch of keyboard warriors, people who I don't think have an appreciation and understanding of campaigns and how they work, going out there being critical for what they're doing. They're doing exactly what they should be doing. They're aggressively organizing. They're aggressively engaging in this debate. And I think that the Republicans need to step up. And so I've been disappointed. The question is, the criticism that I've seen that the Democrats are organizing and fundraising and doing all these things for an upcoming policy debate, and Republicans, there's been this kind of collective, like, how can they be doing this? This is so wrong. No, it's not. It's politics. And this is a policy debate. And there's going to be a political and policy reaction to what happens. And there is an intensity gap where Democrats move faster than Republicans. And on this particular issue, I think I've seen, it was 12 hours after the shooting, and Democrats were at a vigil and they were talking about policy and doing things. And sure, Republicans are outraged. But in the days, where's the press conference? Where's the GOP response? And where's the policy from the Republicans to contrast what the Democrats are doing?
I'm going to agree in part and disagree in part and play devil's advocate in part. My initial thoughts were the 12 hours was too soon. I mean, I completely agree that conversations need to be had. And especially now that the Democrats are having them, Republicans need to enter the conversation. It did feel a little opportunistic. It did feel a little bit of Democrats kind of just waiting for an incident to happen to be able to push out their gun control policy plans. It felt really fast. And I know that this is something that's ongoing. It's been happening for years and decades, that these shootings that they, gun control they want to act. Like I said, we legislate because of stories, right? We legislate because of situations and incidences and tragedies. And so I initially saw their action 12, 24 hours afterwards and thought, whoa, this is really fast. Now, that said, moving beyond that initial thought, I do think that we've seen them dominate, as Bryan mentioned, as you mentioned, dominate the press cycle. We've seen them dominating their news articles, our TV stations, our radio conversations without the Republican or the counter voice in there. And so I think that, we saw there was just on September 1st, we saw that press conference with the 20 some mayors. They're, really standing strong. And that was all over my feed, all over my news stations. And then there are, Republicans who are being active and putting on statements on social media, but we have yet to see more from them. And I think, like you, I do think now we are almost a week past, and we need to see that. We know that they're having the conversations. We know that they have some policy positions. We know that they have some arguments to make to ding Walz on why he didn't pass respond to that Catholic bishop request, the school resource officers, as well as proactive, thoughtful policies that Elliot Ingen has proposed that other members have in their legislation. And we just need to see a little bit more. We need to see that counter. We need to see that response. We need to feel like they care as well. Because again, if this is going to be a conversation about the compassion and the facts and the figures and all of the above, we need to start with Republicans also believe that something needs to be done to protect our children. It's just not guns. And here are the XYZ that Republican legislators want to propose, hope to propose to be passed. I saw also a tweet from Walter Hudson calling out Walz on the special session, calling the special session for this situation, but not school resource officers, which had, bipartisan outrage and a lot of reaction. We've seen a lot of different things from Republican electeds and activists on Twitter, but we just need to see more.
I would agree with you. And a couple points I would raise. One of the things that we spoke about in our episode last week, Becky, we delayed that a day because of the shooting so we could get more information, was there was someone with Moms Demand Action that was outside the school that we saw very early. Yeah, I think showing up to the scene of the shooting is a bit much. But this is the point I've made to some Republicans who've responded to my messages and I've spoken with. Democrats want to win elections too in this state. And so if the public would be outraged by what the Democrats are doing, where is that manifesting anyway? I'm not aware of any general consensus in the public that the Democrats are being ghoulish, that they're taking advantage of the situation. The only place that I'm seeing that coming from is Republicans who want to justify and defend and change the subject from the fact that Republicans are sitting on their hands right now and not doing anything. The Pope issued a public press statement. The Vice President of the United States is flying to Minnesota today to be at Annunciation Church and the school. That is a public event. Why aren't Republicans standing up and talking about some of these proposals in front of the cameras? The Democrats have dominated the message, they've dominated the media, and Republicans have to start engaging on this subject. That doesn't mean that I say that as someone who, as consider myself to be a homeless Republican, I agree with Republicans, the vast majority on these issues, and I want to see them out there talking about school safety, talking about mental health, and making the case just like Bryan Strawser and Rob Doar has, to the degree which Republicans agree with them on stuff. But the Democrats have dominated, and this is why they win elections.
Yeah, and I the last thing I want to say is and just to Rob's comment about the Republican base and the Democrat base on these issues is it's the icky part of politics that, we have to look at. I certainly think, and you've addressed this on social media, that while it's unlikely that anything happens, you said my take is that the DFL is organizing now to change the makeup of the Minnesota legislation, specifically on gun policy. And so as we round things out, chat with us a little bit of how, even if nothing is passed, even if nothing is changed, made into law in this special session, or even in 2026 legislative session, how the Democrats' actions are potentially or likely setting them up for 2026 campaign, and hopefully from their eyes, not from my eyes, but they're hopeful that that will change what the 2027 legislative makeup looks like.
They're active, they're engaged on this issue. They're having press conferences, they're communicating a message, they're fundraising, they're organizing, they're building a team. I think Democrats know how to count. I think that they know that the legislative session, getting something done as a special session, is going to be difficult. But I think they're preparing for not just this battle, but for the next battle. And where are the Republicans? I think that this is an issue that Republicans can organize on too. I think Republicans go out there and talk about being advocates of the Second Amendment, talk about school safety, talk about mental health awareness. And by the way, when I talk about mental health awareness, I'm going to say to the Republicans in the legislature, if you're going to go out there and talk on social media about mental health, you better be prepared to support it to the degree at which it needs to be funded. It needs to be funded aggressively, and it needs to be funded fully. And I hope that's a meaningful point for them. But this would be a prime example of an issue where Republicans could organize, and I think would be good from a wearing our partisans hat, would be good for the Republican base and organizing Republicans. The bottom line is the Democrats are doing it. So why aren't the Republicans? And so I don't see any downside from a policy standpoint. I certainly don't see any downside from a political standpoint. It's just the Republicans have to start doing it.
I am very anxiously awaiting, I'm sure, like you and like many, the governor's proposal on this, when we will hear more about a special session, hear more from Republicans. And I think as we round things out, we will likely, I'd be surprised if we don't see somebody in the field to do some polling on these issues in the coming days, weeks, if they're not already out there currently. So this conversation's not going away. We're certainly going to continue to stay updated, and continue to keep our listeners updated and have these conversations as we move along.
Thank you, Becky.
Rounding things out, a brief reminder about football.
It starts this week.
It starts this week. You ready to?
I'm ready. This is the year. This is the year. I mean, I felt bad for you after the first year. I threw something out there a little bit, but we'll see. This is the year. This is the year. This is it. This is the year. This is the year of me. I'm coming back in all my leagues. No, I'm not concerned about friends. I'm not concerned about family. I'm coming after everybody.
All right. Bring it.
Becky, I want to thank you again for having another episode where we talk about these issues. I want to thank all our listeners for joining us for this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show us some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at @BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.